So welcome everyone. Hello. This is the first community workshop. We are Journalism AI. Journalism AI, for those of you who don't know, is a project of Polis, the journalism think tank at the London School of Economics and Political Science, and is supported by the Google News Initiative. I'm Sabrina Argub. I'm community coordinator. I share this role together with Lakshmi Sivadas, and we're coordinated by our manager Mattia Baretti and our director Charlie Beckett, who are here as well. So Journalism AI is a global initiative that empowers a news organization to use artificial intelligence responsibly. What do? We offer research reports, training materials, and opportunities for collaboration and experimentations for our global network. And this network is a pillar for this project. So at the beginning of this year, we asked ourselves, what can we do for our community? And we had a couple of ideas, but we thought that it'd be better to just ask you. So we received a lot of replies through our channels, and many of you asked us to host a workshop and virtual events on journalism and AI topics. So here we are. Today is our first community workshop. These workshops are meant to be and designed to be a bit more practical and less conversationalist. So we hope this will be the first of many. And finally, just before I introduce you to today's speakers, I just wanted to share with you a couple of tips and rules to make sure that we can all enjoy the workshop. As you notice, your microphones are on mute, so we can avoid any background noise. But throughout the workshop, we will give you the chance to unmute yourselves. And especially once the Q&A starts, you can join in and raise your hands. You can see a little button at the bottom of your menu on Google Meet with the raised hands. And that's where you can queue to get to ask your questions. In the meantime, please join the conversation in the chat. Mattia is there, very active, and will reply to you. And feel free to ask your questions there as well. And finally, just a couple of general reminders. AI is a complex field with a complex vocabulary and a few widely agreed on definitions. So don't be afraid to ask questions and raise your hands whenever something is not clear. And also, this is an open and inclusive space, so we hope to be as open to listen to all different ideas and opinions in this space. Okay, so let's get started. Today we have with us three speakers. Barbara Liborio, who's data journalist and journalism manager at Asmina in Brazil. And she's been working on the political misogynistic discourse monitor. Delfina Rambier, data innovation journalist at La Nación in Argentina, who was on the team who was working on the AIJO project. And finally, Sahiti Sarva, who co-authored the piece When Women Make Headlines for the Pudding. And today we'll be hearing about these projects from all three of them. So let's get started. Barbara, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Sabrina. Hello, everyone. I just share my screen. Just a minute. Let me know if something is wrong. I hope it's okay. So can you see my screen?
Yes.
Yes? Okay, thank you. So first of all, good morning, Brazil, and thank you so much for this invitation. It's an honor to be here. Some of my friends that work at this project are here also, and so hello, everyone. As Sabrina said, I'm Barbara Liborio, a data journalist and journalism manager at Asmina. And I will present you today Political Misogynistic Discourse Monitor, a project that Asmina, Data Crítica, Clip, and La Nación have been working in the last months in the context of Journalism AI Collab. So our work starts from a huge problem, the violent experience of being a woman in social media. So as politicians, journalists, public figures, women receive a lot of offenses and attacks in social media. And sometimes, as this tweet shows, these misogynist attacks came from other public figures, as male politicians. And these attacks initiated real waves of hate speech because after the politicians, their supporters started to offend and attack these women, sometimes in a harder way, with offenses like this. So aware of the escalation of hate speech, particularly against women, our project wants to be able to quickly and assertively monitor when any of these misogynistic attacks is initiated by a politician. If an AI is able to identify a misogynistic tweet, for example, we can search the politician's tweet replies to identify if his supporters are continuing a wave of attacks initiated by him. In 2020, Asmina mapped attacks on women candidates for the municipal elections on social media in Brazil. We monitored tweets based on a filter of offensive terms and expressions. But we had to analyze them one by one to check if they were real insults or attacks on these women. So it was a huge human work. We understand that an AI can do this faster and more assertively and with more scalability. But of course, we had a lot of challenge in this way. In order to address this challenge, first we had to understand how that AI works. So if we wanted a model to detect misogynistic discourse, the AI had to learn what's hate speech against women by giving it a lot of examples of misogynistic discourse. So the first step in the process was to create a database with hand-labeled tweets, pointing out either a tweet is misogynist or not. Therefore, we brought back the methodology of Asmina, but this time adapting it in Spanish as well. So we refined the dictionaries and selected usernames from trendy politicians and also from Black, Indigenous, and diverse public women figures from Brazil, Argentina, Colombia, and Mexico. Finally, after getting our labeled database, we are able to train the AI. At this point, we made a collaboration with Ivan Mesa, which is a researcher from UNAM, a university in Mexico. We trained some language models, which are basically an AI that already knows things about language since they are pre-trained. And our task is to fine-tune that knowledge in order to teach them to identify hate speech against women. Once they learn it, we evaluate them with a score on how good they are classifying it. As we wanted to train a model that were able to detect misogynistic discourse in Portuguese and Spanish, we tested dedicated models in those languages and also a multilingual model, which is a type of model that is able to learn this task in many languages. In the evaluation of our model, we got great results in Spanish and good enough in Portuguese also. So the next step in the process was to create a web application where users can analyze text or even files as simple as a click. Right now, the web application is restricted to the use of a token since we keep developing this prototype, but eventually we want to make this tool available for other projects that just like us are mapping gender violence on social media. So far, we learned a couple of things with this project. One of them is that dictionaries are subject to the context. So every time we want to use them, we need to adapt them to the big picture of that precise moment and location. Another learning is that even for human annotators, it's difficult to agree sometimes if something is misogynist or not. So definitely shouldn't delegate these important decisions to algorithms. And our next stage is to employ this tool and streamline the detection of misogyny political discourse in the context of Latin America. This project is open source, so we have all the documentation available in a repository on GitHub. And this is the team that make all of this possible. I know that some of them are here, so thank you so much for them, and thank you so much for your attention. I think it's all. I just stopped my presentation.
Thank you, Barbara. I just want to remind everyone that we'll be having the Q&A after all of the presentations, so make sure to note down your questions and we'll get to them right after. Next, we have Sahiti. The floor is yours. Yes, we can see the screen, but you're on mute.
I'm sorry. Yeah. So I'm Sahiti Sarva, and today I wanted to talk about the story Leonardo Nicoletti and I had written in collaboration with the Pudding of what does it look like when women make headlines. So the Global Media Monitoring Report and the Gender Gap Report, which Delphina will talk about soon, both will tell you that women make only about 20 to 25% of news mentions. If close to 50% of the population is already underrepresented in the media, how does it look like when they actually do make headlines? And that was the question that both of us tried to answer with our project here. But why is that important, right? Why should we analyze women's headlines? So here's a list of 7 headlines from 8 hours ago. And you see out of the 7 of them, 4 are about crime and violence. And 1 talks about marriage, an idea stereotypically associated with women, and a piece of information that is seemingly irrelevant in that headline. But hey, that could just be me because I'm Googling this from India as women news. But what about everywhere else in the world? To expand our search, we increased it to 4 countries, the UK, US, India, and South Africa, for 186 publications between 2005 and 2021. And we scraped all of the headlines tagged with 20 keywords synonymous with women, women, girl, female, and so on. And that gave us about 382,139 English news headlines. Now, what happens when we have so much data is you have so many questions you want to answer. Our excitement was hitting the roof, but what we also had was a crazy amount of data to clean. Before we start applying any machine learning algorithm or artificial intelligence, there's an immense amount of work that goes into cleaning and removing these seemingly useless words in every sentence. In NLP, this is usually called stop words, a dictionary called stop words, words that are so commonly used that they carry very little useful information. But like Barbara said, any of these dictionaries that are created categorize words as useful or useless depending on the context in which you make them. How is that relevant? When we analyzed this data, to no one's surprise, we found that the man is the first most commonly used word across all of these countries, across all of these years. But the second most commonly used word is first, a stop word in an NLP dictionary, which we had to go back and dig out because in the context of women, the word first is so important because it talks about the first vice president, the first defense minister, and so on and so forth, and it's quite empowering. And we realized that relying on dictionaries alone that are curated before and not for this purpose will not cut it. And so we went ahead and created our own dictionaries that calculate something called gender bias in headlines. Gender bias is a taxonomy proposed by Yasmin Hitti et al. In 2019. And it's a combination of gendered language like actress, daughter, wife, and along with behavioral and social stereotypes around gender. Words like emotional, support, and care. We sat down and we created these dictionaries, massive dictionaries, each with 200 odd words, and we assigned a bias index to every single headline. So if you look at this, for example, daughter an emotional meeting with women given life back by selfless courage of her dead mother is way more biased than the other headline that you see here. All of these headlines and the data sets are public for you to access, but we use this bias index to categorize all the publications, the 184 publications we took data from, and we found that some publications are arguably more biased than others, like when the Daily Mail was reporting how Tracy Cox reveals what women secretly want from their sex lives. So what else does it look like when women make headlines? We used a simple machine learning tool called sentiment analysis, and we found that the story when women make headlines is often very sensational. A lot more sensational than regular headlines that we read, and over time, the number has only gone up. And this could probably be because when women make headlines, the story is twice as likely to be violent than empowering. We use these custom dictionaries that we created for bias, and we created more dictionaries like that to label words in different themes like crime and violence, gender language, empowerment, people and places, and race, ethnicity, and identity. And we measured. So what you see here is the length of each bar is how often a word appears. And you see that there are twice as many bars for violent words as there are for empowering. And this now created a label data set that we can use for any supervised learning projects before. But the most important thing of what it looks like when women make headlines is that it's an unanswered question. At the end of this project, we realized that we curated a data set a labeled data set to begin with that can be used for so many questions that are yet to be answered, like how often are perpetrators mentioned in news headlines about crime and violence? Not very often, if you notice. And how often do we refer to women in leadership positions as women vice president or female mayor instead of calling them by their name? And what are the patterns we are not seeing? How can we use unsupervised learning on a tool like this? And the minute we managed to create labeled data sets, a lot of these questions opened up, which if any of you would be willing to collaborate on, you could reach out to us. But that was the end of our project, and happy Women's Day.
Thank you, Saidi. Thank you for a great presentation. We'll go on with Delphine and then we can start the discussion. Over to you, Delphine.
Perfect. Thank you, Sabrina. Thank you, the Journalism AI team, and everyone for being here. I'm sharing my screen. I don't know if you can see it. Well, as Sabrina said, I'm going to be presenting the AIJO project, which was a global experiment of using AI to approach one of our industry's most pressing challenges and why we are here, which is the need of more or the need of an increased diversity. And this project was born during the Journalism AI, such as Barbara was saying, but during the 2020. So 10 people from 8 different newsrooms and 6 different countries, 6 different languages, sorry, were part of this project. Here we are, all of them. And we had different challenges to pick during the collab, but we chose this one. How we can use AI to understand, identify, and mitigate newsroom biases. Why? Because we wanted, or we believe that there was a great potential to use AI in the name of publishing missions, because we wanted to better serve diverse audiences, because we believe that the amount of diversity or the diversity influences both inside the newsroom and on its output. So we used AI to uncover binary gender representations in our newsrooms. We use a computer vision technology, which is one of the many concepts under the AI hood, to help us identify gender biases by uncover who we actually depict in our newsrooms or news media. So going deeper into the experiment, we analyzed all the images displayed on our front pages of our different news media or newspapers from November 9th to November 15th, 2020, 2 years ago. And I know that you may say that it was a small amount of time, but choosing the length of the experiment was a topic we discussed a lot. But we decided to limit it only to 1 week because of the small amount of time we had. And also we should keep in mind that we wanted to explore the tools and the tools. And our goal was not to come with statistically perfect insights. We wanted to see how this technology could help us in this objective. So how we calculated the ratio between men and women in our photos? We calculated the ratio per image, and then we averaged it with all the pictures that contain a face. So for example, let's imagine that the experiment had only these three images. The first one is 50% female because we have 1 man and 1 woman. The second one is 33% female, and the last one is 100% female. We summed all the different percentages, and then we divided into 3 because it was the total amount of the experiment, and then we come out with the final ratio, which in this case would be 61%. So the step 1 of our experiment was face detection. For this step, we use retina face and a model introduced by the Imperial College of London in 2020. And we prioritized using open source models in order to that these models can be used from other newsrooms. The step 2 was the gender classification. Once we detected faces, we had to predict the gender. And for this step, we used a model from the same institution, but it's called Insight Face. And for the third step was filtering and deciding who to include. So in this picture you are seeing now, we have like 3 faces, but we discussed a lot if we should consider this image as 66% male or 100% male, because we have a huge face and 2 small woman faces on the background. So we finally decided that for these images, or for faces that are very small or blurry, we should not consider them. So in this case, the picture is 100% female. So here are the results. Let's remember that it's only 1 week of 2020, but it gave us a great insight from what we are showing in our news media. So we had like 77% pictures of men in our front pages, and only 22, 9 or 23% in female. So this model is available in our website. We have a GitHub repository, and you can download it and try it on your own newsrooms. But we also wanted to analyze our text, as Sahiti was saying. For this part, we partnered with the Gender Gap Tracker, which is a project run by an NGO in Canada called Informed Opinions, and the Simon Fraser Discourse Lab, which is an university also in Canada. And we could only run this analysis in the publications that published in English, because we tried this model for other languages like Spanish, as is my main language, or Swedish or other languages, and it didn't work. So we ran an NLP analysis in our test to understand how many quotes and mentions men and women had in the texts. So here are the results. They're pretty similar from the image analysis one. We had 73% sources, 73% mentions for men, and then we had only 22% of quotes and mentions for female. Also, we were able to measure the length of the quotes, and as you are seeing, they're pretty balanced, but male had a little bit more of extension when they are being quoted in the news. So if you want to learn more about all this project, you can visit us at AIJOproject.com. You can download the model, visit our GitHub repository, and learn with us. So thank you.
Thank you, Delfina. Thank you to all 3 of you for this amazing presentation and the work you've done on this topic. From now on, we welcome any questions from the participants, so please either raise your hands or type them in the chat. I'm just going to kickstart the conversation by asking you, what was the most difficult part of teaching a machine to recognize bias and hate speech? So for all 3 of you in your projects. Who wants to go first?
I can start. So I think the first challenge was deciding how to map this violence against women And when we made that choice to build a misogyny dictionary, we realized that the dictionary would be very much alive. Firstly, because we are talking about different countries, and what is misogynistic in Brazil may not to be misogynistic in Argentina, and etc. But even in each country, this is very much alive, because sometimes there are words that were not created to be misogynistic, but in some contexts, they are misogynistic. And also, I think because misogyny can be very subtle or ironic, sarcastic, and AI has a hard time recognizing this. And because misogyny is discourse, when you're talking about misogyny, it's a structural problem, and how to turn a structural problem in a dictionary without context. So I think it is our big challenge, because we are keeping on this. So it's our big challenge, I think.
Just to follow, sorry.
No, go on, Sahiti.
I think the problem we had was fairly similar to what Barbara was having, in the sense that identifying context is very difficult when you're tagging words as, say, even violent, for example, or if you're tagging them as gendered. And what also happens is a word which was once violent need not be considered violent anymore, because things change over time. Like if you look at the word slave, for example, it used to be when someone kills somebody else, and then it became a euphemism for a gold digger, where you use it as, and where you use it to label women. And then later the whole community reclaimed that word, where now slay queen is an empowering word, or it's used in an empowering context. And the minute it changes context, it gets very difficult to tag all of these words to a specific dictionary, and you'll have to keep monitoring that over time. And I think that was pretty challenging. The other thing is, if we start using unsupervised learning techniques like topic modeling or something along those lines in these data sets, you often end up with clusters that don't make sense entirely. And it takes a lot of expertise and fine-tuning the model to give you something that is useful, that you can report on, that you can use after a point. And that's a lot of time and resources that we must invest in it to be able to use unsupervised learning on large data sets.
Yeah, I think we had many challenges. Ones we could solve them, and other ones we still cannot solve them. But regarding the image analysis, we know that we are depicting binary gender, and we know and we believe that gender is not binary, but it was the only chance we had, because we were from different countries, we had different languages, and it was an analysis that we could share. I mean, I told that we tried an NLP model with the gender gap tracker. It didn't work for other languages, so it was the only possibility we had. Also, we had to train the model, because the model was trained with Asian faces, and Latin American faces are very different, so it was kind of biased. But we wanted to use an open source model, as I told before, because we believe that other newsrooms should run the same analysis. And well, regarding the NLP, I already said something, but we wanted to run it for Spanish publications, and we couldn't, or Sweden publications. We are now working on at La Nación. We are now working on a model to do the same, but in Spanish. But yeah, it was crazy to discover that NLP is not as powerful as it is for English. I know that Barbara and her team had the same issue, but yeah.
Thank you. Martin Dalpak.
Thanks. So first, just thanks to all three of you for really interesting, but also, I guess, kind of depressing presentations. Super fascinating work. I have two questions for Sahiti. So the first question is about the data collection process. So I see that in the chat that you've used Rapid API and the Google News API. So I haven't used that before. I'm just curious, because as far as I understood, you were searching for terms related to women. So I'm just curious why you chose not to use sort of more entity extraction type techniques. to find, for example, female names in the headlines. So it might just be because it would be too difficult or too computationally expensive. But I'm just curious what your thoughts were on that point. And the second one is, so when you had the graph that showed types of headlines that were about women, so you had sort of the ratio that was violent, did you have a baseline to compare that to? And if so, did the headlines about women differ from that baseline?
Both really good questions. Thank you for that. For the first part, why did we not make it more specific and look for names? And I think we wanted to also understand how women are represented more in general, and also because we were covering 4 different countries. And like you said, like the translation problem hit us as well, and we actually parked that. We dropped all the Hindi headlines that we found. So we wanted to try and get the least common denominator, get as many headlines as possible. And using words like women and so on would give you more results on Google News as well. Like if you say that women or lady, one of these words is definitely there, you end up with a much larger data set of news to analyze. And we were also looking specifically in the top 50 sites where we could find data in all of these 4 countries. So if we make it even more specific, we would run into problems of like not being able to automate it, or we'll have to manually intervene at every point. But using these keywords made it easier for us to automate that process by using the API and scrape all the data. But that's a great idea. We should probably think about for the next round when we have a smaller research question to answer, where we are only maybe analyzing violent words, and then maybe we can start using better keywords. About your second question on baseline, that is a question we debated about back and forth on if we should compare if women's news is more violent than any other gender's news. But we decided against, especially for the theme part, we decided against it because we thought there is no such thing as a benchmark that we need to compare one group of like women to men and then say it's more than men, so it's a problem. The fact that in the circle of women itself, there are twice as many violent headlines is a problem in itself, and it doesn't have to necessarily be compared with a benchmark, and there is no such group as a benchmark. But we did use a benchmark for the sentiment analysis because that was about polarity, and we collected headlines in general from all of these websites and compared it to only those headlines that are tagged with women. And there we found that the women's news is more sensational than the baseline. But here the baseline was not men, it was just everybody else in general, general news. But with respect to themes, I think it got a bit tricky, and we didn't want to center it around a comparison between male and female, so to speak. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that makes much more sense as a baseline as well. So just to have the news in general, because my question would have been, is it that the news in general is violent, or is it something specific about news about women? So yeah, that's a great answer. And so thanks.
Just as an interesting fact, we also had a temporal analysis in the end, and we saw that the empowering words went up as a positive and not depressing fact. And the gendered words, like words like sexy or pretty, started to go down. But the violent words kind of remained constant throughout. So I guess drama and killing is part of life for a while.
Thank you, Saiti. Sanya.
Thank you very much, Sabrina, and thank you everybody for the amazing presentations. It's always great to listen to wonderful women talking about such important topics. And my question is actually divided into 2 parts. It's a comment because I want to share what's happening in my region in the Middle East, and also I want to see how can we compare that to what's happening in other regions as well. So one of the main issues that we face in Arabic, in the Arabic language, is the fact that we have words for males and we have words for females, and historically everything has been written for men. So whenever you want to talk in a headline or in a text in the body or things like that, it's directed to men. And some people say it could include men and women, but there has been a movement recently to actually, whenever we have something that's directed to women, to use the feminine language more. But that becomes a little bit challenging because sometimes you want to talk to everybody, but at the same time you want to be talking to women and men at the same time. So my question is this something, so we're talking about audience here, we're not talking about like text or the content of your text. We're talking about audience. So is this something that you've ever looked at in your newsrooms? And I mean, I know that there are other languages around the world that have the same kind of approach, which is male and female language. What are others doing in terms of news content and news publications to address that, if you have an answer for that? Thank you very much again.
You want to go, Sahiti?
No, go ahead.
Okay. Well, in Spanish, we have something similar, because when we want to refer to a group which has men and women, we use the masculine way of the word, and that's a challenge if we want to analyze. I mean, I said before that we are working on the gender gap tracker model, but in Spanish, and we are not considering, for example, plurals, because we know that it might be biased because we have men and women, but we are referring only to masculines because of the word. But here in Argentina, I'm going to talk about society, not about media. But here in Argentina, we have a movement that wants to use the E instead of the O for the plural. It's called like, I don't know how to translate it, but yeah, they want to use the E instead of the O for the plural way of the word. But none of the media is using it, or maybe it's very, yeah, inclusive. Thank you, Fer. Inclusive language. None of the media is using it, or maybe like a very niche media is using it. And yeah, that's the situation.
I think it's the same in Brazil. As Mina is a feminist magazine, and we are always talking that our feminist is not only for women, but for non-binary people. So we are always trying to use the inclusive language. If this the situation, or I don't know, I really don't have the answer for your question, but I think it's a challenge that we are facing, but I don't know how can we solve this problem. But we are in the same path, in the same way of Argentina using more and more the inclusive language.
Just to add, I think the cultural revolution in terms of changing language hasn't necessarily hit India fully yet, where we start to address, there's just, it's in the comic circles or the stand-up comedies where people make fun of how the gender for inanimate objects and women is the same thing, like the gender for a pig and a woman is the same in Telugu, but a gender for a man is different, and it remains in those circles, but it hasn't yet traveled to newsrooms where people are actively taking that challenge up, potentially because there are a lot of other issues and people do not, words are used as an approximation and they're not taken very literally, and they're just reading past, and it's not necessarily a battle they think it's worth fighting for. And the other part here is that it's very segmented. A lot of Indian languages are dying out, and English is becoming more and more prominent. It is almost our official language at this point, and it's dying out. And the readership that goes back to Telugu or Hindi news is an extremely specific group of people, and I'm not sure of the overlap between Hindi news readership and English news readership at this point. So I think another bigger problem is that by not analyzing that and understanding the problems in it, we are leaving out an entire population on what news they're consuming. Not a solution to the problem you face, but
absolutely. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have a question from the chat from Arancha. I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly. It's for Delfina. She's asking, have you taken consideration the type of images in your project? There are a lot of biases in the kind of photos that are used in media depending on gender. So, for example, more formal images for men, more superficial for women.
Well, we haven't run that analysis is a very detailed one, but we wanted to analyze the photos that are used per section, but we had issues like clustering the sections because we were 8 different media outlets, and we had very different sections. So we had an issue clustering them or grouping them. That's why we didn't run that analysis, but we could run it in our own newsroom. And yeah, definitely we know that we are going to find very disparities in the different sections, such as economy, politics, or sports maybe. So yeah, it's a very interesting point.
Thank you. We have still time for more questions. I see Elena just posted one. Question following up. So have you ever, or do you have plans or ideas to work on more hidden stereotypes / slurs?
I think we have the plan, but I don't think we have the answer to solve this problem because, as you said, sometimes it's harder to identify misogyny when you're talking about clear words, like because, for example, when you're talking about Black women, sometimes people are using these words, but not in a racist way, but just for talking about the issue, the topic. So we are still in this step, I think, like trying to understand in these cases and trying to, because we as a team, when we are tagging these tweets, we talked a lot and we had to make some agreements, because as I said, sometimes what is misogyny, what's clear misogynist to me is not for my colleague, or sometimes what's clearly misogynist to a woman is not clearly misogynist to a man. So we have to do some agreements and we have to talk a lot about this. And when you're talking about these hiding stereotypes, it's harder because sometimes it's harder to a man or harder to a human tagging a human journalist or a human being understand this. So we want to work more in these hiding stereotypes, but it's without giving the context to the AI. It's huge. It's a big challenge. So we want to do, but I can't say if we will, because I don't know if we know as we can solve this problem. But yes, of course, we want to.
Yeah. I think usually in a project like this, there are more parked ideas than the ideas that got implemented. So there's always so many things. And just to answer two specific ideas that we found interesting, and we couldn't because it got difficult with the context. One is what I mentioned towards the end, is identifying how many times we do not mention the perpetrator when we talk about crime and violence. And we try to do this, but it's again difficult because some headlines are like man raped women or man killed women, and others are like woman 82 killed by a man. And these are things that are, although very easy to sit and manually identify, difficult to automate when you have so many headlines in place. And this is a serious problem that a lot of academics are talking about in literature as well, where we say that we put an undue attention on the victim. And one of the things that we had to leave out was, a lot of times there were reports, qualitative studies, that said that we give out characteristics and qualities of the victim in the headline, as opposed to having details about the perpetrator. Like, for example, a lot of headlines say that XYZ crime was done in front of her husband or in front of a child, or this person married to this other person has now, completely irrelevant information is her marital status, or if she was consuming alcohol when that happened. These kind of irrelevant information, and it needs to be called out. And that's one of these hidden stereotypes. Say, for example, that women don't drink, or they should not be drinking or indulging in any of these activities. That's definitely one. And the other very interesting idea that we could work on is identifying how many times these headlines focus on women's safety versus women's security. A lot of policy issues also get focused on women's security, but that's not what we want. We don't want to cage women and secure them as though that is what's supposed to be done. The entire world is supposed to be free, where women are safe outside. So it's often treated where in a lot of places, women are stopped from going to some place, or women-only cabins are made in Delhi in the metro station. But instead, the idea is to make the streets safer, and how many headlines are actually identifying the difference and talking about these. And these two are sort of, again, it's a stereotype that if a woman should stay indoors and not go outdoors, so you must secure her dignity, which is currently the Indian law for sexual violence, where it is a violation against a woman's dignity. And these two ideas, I think, are we can definitely work on, because there is data, but of course all the contextual problems will surface to handle them.
Thank you, Saiki. We have time for one more question. Anyone wants to raise their hand? Otherwise, I'll ask the last one for all three of you. So just to finish with some advice for whoever might be starting out similar investigations, what are some practical takeaways in using data sets and identifying misrepresentations like you did?
No, go, Sahiti. I was going to say, what a question.
And I guess one of the advice I would definitely give, because we are reaching a point where there is data poverty in one part of the world, and then there is an immense amount of data in the other part of the world. And like we already discussed, there's a lot of work done in English. And the availability of data is usually an impediment to not do research in other cultures or other contexts where there is data unavailable. But even if it is in English, say, for example, if you go down to English news outlets in countries like South Africa, we have the least amount of data for a country like South Africa. So the advice I would give, contrary to, I guess, what you would expect, is not to give up in those situations because you wouldn't have data, and try to find alternate sources to scrape data or to find data, and not let the availability of data hinder us from using all of these advanced techniques that we have, because then we will be contributing to the problem of some parts of the world benefiting from the data availability while others are left behind, and we can't undo such a thing. So although it is difficult, there are a lot of new data sources are emerging right now. Like Twitter, for example, has become a very big data source, like you already saw. And there are all of these things that we can start using alongside typical journalistic platforms to start collecting data and analyzing them. And those tools are becoming better over time. So that would be an advice I would give, to not give up on developing countries.
Yeah, I was going to point out the same. I think that the key with all this is never give up in anything, not only for looking for data to analyze, but also in our case, what happened was that dictionaries or data to boost the accuracy of the different NLP models were not so good. So we started scraping data from Wikidata, from Wikipedia, from different news sites to fit the model and boost its accuracy. So yeah, I think that you should never give up and try to find different ways to do the same task a model can do it, or is trying to do it, because maybe you will learn a lot, and definitely, and you will also maybe find insights that you weren't expecting to. So yeah, like the point is never give up on anything.
Yeah, I think the same, and never give up because of human work, because I think everyone thinks that trained AI is beautiful, but doesn't think it takes a lot of human work, like tagging tweets, tagging publications, tagging, and yes, it's huge, but it's necessary. So we have to do this. And as I said in the Journalism AI collab workshop, I think the collaboration is the key also. So in our case, for example, we have the methodology, but we have had some challenge in the structural things like training in AI. And we have this collaboration with a researcher from Mexico, from our university from Mexico, and it was essential for our work. So maybe one one of the, I don't know, maybe someone is thinking, okay, I have an idea, but I don't know how I can make it possible. And you can search for people that maybe doesn't have the idea but have the tools. So I think we have always to looking for people to want to join us in our challenge. So I think it's a good advice also.
Yeah, I think that's why spaces are crucial, because I mean we met not only these workshops but also the journalism AI. We met people that may have done this before or is doing this, so you can find collaborative solutions and try to look for solutions that you may not be thinking of. So I think those spaces are crucial. So if you can join them, you must do it, because you learn a lot and you solve lots of your problems.
If I could just jump on that and shout out to my team. Some of them couldn't be here today, but Leonardo and I both were freelancing when we did this project, and we started off. But throughout the course of the project, we learned so much. And that was also because we collaborated with The Pudding, which is a data journalism platform. And they are very open to people pitching stories to them. And they have incredible technical expertise as well to sort of help out if people are having challenges, but you have a great idea and you're looking for something like that. And we had a great time working with them. So I just wanted to send out some appreciation.
Thank you. Thank you, all three of you, for the amazing presentation and for this workshop. And the work that you've been doing has been so insightful on a topic that I believe is so important at this time. So happy International Women's Day to everyone.